baby, don't you cry.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. 100 years ago this week, the Great War ended. The war to end all wars. At the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month. When we as civilians think about what we've accomplished over the course of a century, many of us think of the peacetime accomplishments. But a veteran may reflect upon a different set of accomplishments. The popular image of World War I is a soldier in a muddy trench. But technological developments in engineering, metallurgy, chemistry, and optics had produced weapons deadlier than anything mankind had known before. The power of defensive weapons made winning the war on the Western Front all but impossible for either side. Allied soldiers still went over the top, climbing out of their trenches and crossing no man's land to reach enemy trenches. They had to cut through belts of barbed wire before they could use rifles, bayonets, pistols, and hand grenades to capture enemy positions. Victory usually meant that they had seized only a few hundred yards of shell-torn earth at a terrible cost in lives. Wounded men often lay helpless in the open until they died. Those lucky enough to be rescued still faced horrible sanitary conditions before they could be taken to proper medical facilities. Between attacks, the snipers, artillery, and poison gas caused misery and death. Tanks proved to be the answer to the stalemate in the trenches. This British invention used American-designed Caterpillar tracks to move the armored vehicles, equipment, machine guns, and sometimes light cannon. Chemical warfare first appeared when the Germans used poison gas during a surprise attack in Flanders, Belgium in 1915. At first, the gas was released from large cylinders carried by the wind into nearby enemy lines. But later, those gases were loaded into artillery shells and shot into enemy trenches. The Germans used this weapon the most, realizing that enemy soldiers wearing gas masks did not fight as well. Both sides used a variety of big guns on the Western Front, ranging from huge naval guns mounted on railroad cars to short-range trench mortars. The Germans used super-long artillery to shell Paris from almost 80 miles away. The artillery shells blasted vast crater moon-like landscapes where beautiful fields and woods had once stood. Perhaps the most significant technological advance during World War I was the improvement of the machine gun, a weapon originally developed by an American. The Germans recognized its military benefit early on, and the weapon's full potential was demonstrated on the Somme battlefield in July of 1916, when German machine guns killed or wounded almost 60,000 British soldiers in only one day. The firing may have stopped on November 11, 1918, but modern war technology had changed the course of civilization. Millions have been killed, gassed, maimed, or starved, and famine and disease continued to rage through Central Europe, taking countless lives. But while the tactics and strategies may have changed over time, the reasons we fight have not. And to those men and women who served our country and defended the cause of liberty, freedom, and democracy, we graciously use this time today to say thank you for your service and for your sacrifice.
To those who were not able to come home from their service, we remember them and their families and acknowledge the incredible and immeasurable sacrifice that they've given for all of us today. I also want to be mindful of the fact that we are still a country in conflict, and there are today active duty men and women who are serving in countries all over the world on our behalf and in our name, and who are putting themselves often in harm's way every day and even at this moment for us. And we keep them in our thoughts and our prayers as we're here today as well. I also want to recognize that today, as Jay mentioned, this is the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day, of the 11th day of the 11th month of the year. A momentous occasion which was the armistice and the coming to peace after World War I, a time of incredible pain and war, and everyone finally came together at a time of peace. And the reason I like to mention that, of course, is to be mindful that while it's sometimes necessary to be in conflict and sometimes necessary to go to war, we all share the common goal that we all wish to live together in peace and justice. And that, at the end of the day, is something that we all have in common and that we all fight for. Veterans Day is one of only a few federal holidays, and that's a statement about its significance and the magnitude of the gratitude that we have for the veterans that we're honoring today. In our busy lives, we're given a day off from school and work so that we can focus on the true meaning of the day, a day to say thank you to those who have served. We thank all the veterans here today from Holliston as well as from elsewhere who may be visiting us, as well as those who have served throughout the history of our country when we needed them to. When I reflect on this day personally, I find myself thinking about our remarkable history as a country. For over 2 centuries, our nation has defined itself as one that stands for the most righteous of values: liberty, equality, opportunity, and justice. I believe that these are the most lofty, but also the most fragile values that a community or a nation can sustain for its people. These values have been forged and sustained over the course of our history, but defined and underscored at key moments when it was our soldiers, our veterans, who served on the front lines, served to defend our shared values on our behalf. Our democracy is not precious and admired because it comes easily, but because it is hard, and no other achieves it as we do. It is so remarkable that we choose decade after decade to send our most vital, our strongest, our most courageous citizens to fight to defend it and all that it stands for. Those ordinary yet extraordinary men and women that we send on this important mission are the soldiers, the veterans that we honor and remember today. The Minutemen, our nation's first veterans, earned our freedom and independence while risking their lives. In the Civil War, many fought to define what it really means to be the land of the free. In conflicts from World War I, whose anniversary we celebrate today, to Korea, to Vietnam, to Iraq and Afghanistan, our soldiers have put themselves at risk not because they like to fight, but because of the great value they place on protecting a democratic society for the rest of us. There are a few words, truly, that are weighty enough to recognize the duty and the sacrifice that they have given. I'd like to finish by sharing with you one of my most proud moments as an American citizen, and it happened about, I'm hesitant to admit, but it was about 30 years ago now, when I was a college student over in France. I had the opportunity to spend the year in France, and I was walking with a friend down one of the streets of Paris, and we were approached by a man who was eagerly approaching us, saying, "Are you Americans? Are you Americans?" And we were sort of taken aback, and he said, "Well, yes, we are Americans." And this Frenchman proceeded to thank us profusely and say how grateful he was to us and to our country for intervening in World War II. And he says, "Were it not for you and your country, I would not be a free man today. And France would not be the free country that it is today." And I am so grateful. And I can tell you it was at that moment that I first truly appreciated as a young American citizen what it meant to be as an American, and what that sacrifice meant not only to our residents and our citizens, but to citizens around the world. And I can say that I was so incredibly proud, and am so incredibly proud to be an American citizen. Democracy is not easy, and the struggle will always continue as we, the people, work to define ourselves in the context of changing times. But what will always be the same is that there will always be those of us who are willing to risk it all as individuals for the good of the greater whole. Those with the bravery, the commitment, and the fearlessness to stand on principle at great personal cost. Those are our veterans, and we are so grateful for their service. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We'll now have the placing of the wreath by Holliston's oldest veteran, Vasco Robelli, Ron Turcott, a Vietnam veteran. Fire squad. Order. World War II veterans that line up here in front. If the Korean War veterans would join the World War II veterans. Vietnam. Grenada. Panama. Desert Storm. Iraq and Afghanistan.